Gödel and Mathematical Intuition. The crisp autumn air of Princeton seemed to hum with unspoken complexities as I, a young doctoral candidate wrestling with the nuances of mathematical philosophy, found myself once again outside Kurt Gödel's office at the Institute for Advanced Study. My previous conversation had been illuminating, but I had pressed for a more exhaustive explanation of his views on mathematical intuition, particularly in light of various interpretations and criticisms. He had, surprisingly, agreed to a further discussion. The office was as before, dimly lit, with the quiet hum of profound thought seeming to permeate the very air. The faint scent of old books and, perhaps, a hint of chalk dust lingered. Professor Gödel, a diminutive figure with an immense intellectual presence, greeted me with that same soft, high-pitched voice and a look of keen, if slightly wary, inquiry. A half-empty glass of milk, his customary companion, sat on the meticulously tidy desk. After I briefly recapped my lingering questions, particularly concerning the full relationship between his Platonism and his concept of intuition, and how he addressed arguments that sought to separate them or limit the scope of intuition, he settled back in his chair. For a long moment, he gazed out at the tranquil woods beyond the window, as if gathering the threads of a vast, internal tapestry. Then he began. "You ask for a fuller picture," he said, his voice gaining a measured cadence, as if preparing to unfold a proof. "Is a subject often simplified or perhaps viewed through too narrow a lens by commentators? My Platonism, you see, is not a mere philosophical preference tacked onto my mathematical work. It is intrinsically woven into the very fabric of how we come to know mathematical truths. And mathematical intuition is the primary means of that knowing." He paused, then continued, "Let us begin with what mathematical intuition is and how it functions. It is not, as some may imagine, a faculty dispensing immediate, unassailable truths. Rather, it operates analogously to our sensory perception of the physical world. Think of it in distinct stages, or elements, if you will. First, there are the mathematical objects themselves, sets, numbers, functions, even the transfinite. These objects, in my view, exist independently of our minds, of our constructions. They constitute an objective reality. Then there is what I call the given. This is the effect these external objects have on us, an impression they produce. It is a passive, involuntary reception, not through our physical senses in the usual way, but through a different kind of relationship between ourselves and this objective mathematical reality. Finally, there are the ideas, the concepts, the propositions we actively form based on this given. This is where the mind begins its work of structuring and understanding. So you see, he elaborated, we can speak of two principal moments or processes that constitute mathematical intuition. The first is what one might term the objective moment, mathematical intuition as perception. Here, the independent mathematical object impresses itself upon our passive faculty. This is the moment where we obtain the data from these real, independent objects. It is this very moment that necessitates an ontological commitment, a realism, a Platonism, regarding the objects of mathematics. The second moment is subjective, mathematical intuition as reason. This involves both the passive element, what is given, and an active element from our side. From the data received, we engage in a process of constructing ideas, forming propositions, and undertaking other rational processes. This is where we clarify, reflect, and build our mathematical understanding. I interjected. Some interpretations, like those of Charles Parsons, suggest that your concept of mathematical intuition is more a theory of reason, and that it can be detached from Platonism, particularly for certain areas of mathematics. Gödel nodded slowly. "Ah, yes, Parsons. He has written on this with some persistence. His argument often is that one can have an intuition, perhaps what he calls a didicto intuition, an immediate evidence given through the senses, or a propositional intuition, that applies to, say, classical, finite, or intuitionistic mathematics, without requiring a robust ontological commitment beyond what is given in space-time. He suggests this kind of intuition doesn't necessarily need Platonism. However, Gödel continued, leaning forward slightly, this view, I believe, misses a crucial point, or rather, it attempts a separation that, for me, is not tenable. My philosophical notebooks and earlier works show that the concept of mathematical intuition, linked to a realist stance, was present well before my later, more explicit formulations. It was not something that arose independently of or prior to my realist convictions. The idea of a sense that perceives abstract concepts or objects was already there. Parsons might characterize my view as a theory of reason, and in part it is. The second, subjective moment I described is a rational process. But it is a process that operates on something, on the given that is perceived. To focus solely on the rational processing and downplay the perceptual input from objectively existing entities is to have an incomplete picture. Even when I speak of the clarification of ideas as influenced perhaps by Husserl's phenomenology, this clarification is of concepts and objects that are presupposed to be real. It is not about creating them ex nihilo through reason alone. Consider the axioms of set theory, he said, his gaze intense. Parsons might suggest that the epistemic justification for these axioms has a plausibility comparable to a hypothetical or formalistic stance. But for me, the belief in these axioms, their capacity to force themselves upon us as being true, stems from the clarity and distinctness with which they are, or can be, perceived through mathematical intuition. This implies they are not arbitrary conventions but reflections of an underlying mathematical reality. Parsons also distinguishes different types of intuition. I ventured, recalling the arguments from Kubak's paper. A Kantian intuition from sensibility, and a didicto or propositional intuition for mathematics. Indeed, Gödel replied. And he suggests that what I call mathematical intuition aligns more with a rational evidence, where propositions are taken as evident on reflection. He argues that for classical or finite mathematics, an intuition based on common sense assumptions of logic might suffice without a deep ontological commitment. He believes there can be mathematical intuition, in this limited sense, without Platonism. But this raises a question, Gödel mused. What is the relationship between an intuition applicable to finite mathematics, what I might have termed concrete mathematical intuition, or Anschauung in the Dialectica paper, and the intuition that grasps transfinite sets? Are they entirely different? If one accepts a concrete intuition for finitary objects, which does not seem to require robust Platonism, does that mean Platonism is irrelevant for other areas? I think not. Even in justifying methods for classical and finitary mathematics, when one pushes the boundaries, questions of impredicativity arise, for instance, which often hint at the need to grasp totalities, a notion closely allied with Platonism. The finite intuition, if taken alone, encounters limitations. Alternatively, one could argue, as my work sometimes implies, that the same fundamental mathematical intuition applies across all of mathematics, from the integers to the highest transfinite sets. In the Gibbs lecture, for instance, I argued for the inexhaustibility of mathematics, assuming mathematics has content. The axioms needed for mathematics proper must be non-arbitrary, evident without proof. And for me, the natural starting point, the foundation, is set theory. The axiomatization of the concept of set itself, this very concept, I hold to be evident in this way, not merely a mental construct, but something perceived. If this is so, then the intuition that grasps set is not different in kind from that which might grasp integer, though the objects differ in complexity. Is a unified faculty perceiving different aspects of one mathematical reality. He gestured towards his desk. The assertion that the axioms force themselves upon us as being true is crucial here. It doesn't mean they are true in a merely conventional or formal sense. It means they are perceived as true because they correspond to the structure of this independent mathematical reality. This is not simply rational evidence divorced from an objective world. It is evidence from that world, mediated by intuition. Then there is the matter of credence, I prompted. Parsons argues that the credence given to axioms of set theory, since they are not immediately evident in a sensory way, could equally be granted by a formalist. that realism is not essential for this credence. Gödel's expression became more animated. This is a significant point of divergence. The credence I speak of is not arbitrary belief. It is confidence born from a perception, however fallible. When I say we should have no less confidence in mathematical intuition than in sense perception, I am highlighting their analogous epistemic roles in accessing their respective realities. Both are fallible. Sense perception can lead to illusions. Mathematical intuition can lead to paradoxes if concepts are not perceived with sufficient clarity. These paradoxes, like those in early set theory, are not disproofs of Platonism, but stimuli for a deeper, more refined perception of the underlying concepts, like the iterative concept of set. This is quite different from the credence a formalist might grant. The formalist's credence is in the consistency or utility of a system of symbols. My credence is in the truth of propositions because they accurately describe an objective conceptual realm. We do not have absolutely certain knowledge in a Cartesian sense, even of simple things like 2 plus 2 is equal to 4, because the concepts involved are never fully grasped by us in their entirety. Knowledge and belief exist on a spectrum of certainty and plausibility. The axioms of set theory are not obvious in a trivial sense, but their lack of immediate, absolute clarity does not prevent us from gaining knowledge from them, especially when they prove fruitful and lead to a coherent and expanding body of mathematics. This argument from success supports the realist outlook. My belief or credence in set theory is an act according to what is perceived via this intuition. It's a decision to trust this faculty as a means of accessing truth, just as we trust our senses, despite their imperfections. This is why the formalist alternative regarding credence is not equivalent. Finally, Gödel said, his voice softening slightly, Parsons raises the point that even if mathematical intuition works as I describe, it doesn't inherently justify the existence of mathematical objects or guarantee that intuition concerns truth, or that it will solve problems like the continuum hypothesis. My response to this is twofold. First, the truth that intuition concerns is, again, correspondence to this objective conceptual reality. Our perceptions are fallible, but they are perceptions of something. Second, my belief that we can, in principle, decide such problems stems from a rationalistic optimism. If reason poses questions it cannot answer, it would imply an imperfection, an inconsistency in reason itself, which seems contrary to the profound order and precision we have thus far discovered in mathematics. The mind in its use is not static, it develops. We understand abstract terms more precisely as we use them. New mathematical intuitions leading to the decision of such problems are perfectly possible. This development, this unfolding of concepts through intuition, is how we progress. He leaned back, a faint, almost imperceptible sigh escaping him. So you see, the perception of real objects through mathematical intuition, our ability to perceive concepts as independent entities, and the consequent realist commitment are not addenda to my philosophy of mathematics. They are inextricably linked to mathematical intuition itself. To attempt to separate them, or to restrict intuition to a purely rational, non-perceptual faculty, is to remove a significant part of what characterizes it and what, I believe, makes mathematics possible as a science that discovers truths about an objective domain. The perceptual process, the Platonism, is not an option to be taken or left, it is foundational. The room was silent for a while, save for the ticking of an unseen clock. Gödel had, in his precise and exhaustive way, laid bare the intricate connections he saw between the world of mathematics, the mind that perceives it, and the philosophical commitments that such perception entails. He had not just defined intuition. He had described a whole epistemology, one where humankind could, however gradually and imperfectly, glimpse the eternal forms of mathematical reality. As I left the Institute that day, the autumn leaves swirling around me seemed less like random patterns and more like complex symbols in a grand, unfolding text. Professor Gödel had provided not just answers, but a way of seeing. The journey into the labyrinth of mathematical truth, It was clear, required not only rigorous logic but also this profound, perceiving intuition, grounded in the very reality it sought to understand.